Good afternoon, everyone. This is David Mandel at OHEL. We welcome everyone to a difficult conversation about the circumstances that are going on in Israel right now. We're going to be discussing loan, but not alone, supporting lone soldiers from afar. A conversation for parents, friends, family, anyone that is involved in this issue. The most often asked question to people in Chutz La'aretz outside of Israel is, do you have any relatives in Israel? And some people say, I have a son in the army, I have a daughter in seminary, I have a cousin in this mashav, I have my family up north. The best answer that I heard from a friend, do you have any family in Israel? Sure. I have several million family members living in Israel. That's the best answer that I heard from anyone. This conversation is for family members and others speaking about lone soldiers in Israel. We're joined by Dr. Naomi Baum, a specialist in trauma, partnering with OHEL in many different ways during this very difficult time. Dr. Baum not only does work worldwide in OHEL for the last 20 years, she also has 4 sons and a grandson currently serving in the IDF. We're joined by Tani Rice, a former IDF lone soldier, who will speak about his experiences, currently a social worker in Bnei Akiva School in Toronto. We're joined by Rabbi Meir Rosenfeld, an attorney, executive director of Yeshiva Shalivim. He's a parent of a former lone soldier in the IDF, as well as in Shin Bet. I guess he can say in Shin Bet because he's not currently in Shin Bet in Ramallah. And Dr. Norman Blumenthal, OHEL's director of the Zakta Family National Trauma Center. Let's begin with Dr. Baum. We ask each of you to feel free to ask any question on the chat function that you have on your screen. You can either do it so that everyone participating will see your question, or you can do it as a private chat that I will see the question that you're asking. We will respond to as many questions as possible. We have many questions that people have submitted. This conversation is also being audio and video recorded, and we will send this out to everyone either later today or tomorrow. I thank my colleague, Racha Rupp, who heads up OHEL's trauma work in South Florida, Tzivi Ryder, Laura Bart, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, for organizing this conversation. With that introduction, Dr. Naomi Baum, thank you very much for joining us again in a conversation. Please go ahead and share your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you, I think, on behalf of everybody for hosting these very important conversations. What I want to do is divide my talk into 2 parts. I want to talk about first about you, how you can help yourselves during these difficult situations, and then talk specifically to the parents of lone soldiers, how they can help their soldiers. So I think for everybody, whether we live in Israel or abroad, this is a particularly difficult time, extremely stressful. And for those of you who have family members and friends in Israel, even more so. Even, the closer you are, we know the closer you are to people who are in Israel, the more you are affected. And when we talk about affected, we know that high levels of stress affect people in all sorts of ways. I'm not going to go through all the symptoms, but if you've been feeling a little bit off over the last 2 weeks, that would be normal. As a matter of fact, what we say during acute stress, basically any reaction is normal. Any symptom you have, if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, if you're lacking concentration, all those things, all of that is normal. And it's good to remember that, because sometimes people get pretty excited. They get worried that they're going crazy. And we have to reassure them that for the most part, they're not. This is a normal stress reaction. The other thing we have to remember, and I think this is particularly important for parents of lone soldiers, is that different people react differently. So you may be expressing a lot of anxiety and fear, and your spouse may be very contained and very outwardly calm, and that may be kind of annoying. But you have to remember that different people express their emotions differently, and there's not really a right or a wrong way. So when we talk about what we can do to help ourselves, and I think it is important to talk about what we do to help ourselves, because if you are a parent of a lone soldier, and you get a call from your soldier son, you want to be able to hold it together. If you're speaking to your children who live in Israel, you want to be able to hold it together. You don't want to dump all of your anxiety and all of your worries and all of your feelings, which are totally legitimate. You don't want to dump them on the people who are on the ground in Israel, certainly not the soldiers, and probably also not the, what we call here in Israel, the home front, the Oref, because we really need all the support we can get here. And it's important to be able to share those feelings of worry and anxiety, but I would say try to contain them when you're talking to people from Israel. So what can you do to find support? And you can reach out to family and friends, and you should reach out to family and friends. Being alone with this is very difficult. Take the time to listen to each other. If you have, there are support groups available. Joining in this webinar is a perfect example of getting support and sharing feelings. So that would be first and foremost, have a place where you can unload, share, but don't do it with your lone soldier son, probably with your children who are living in Israel. Second thing you can do to help yourself is to limit your exposure to the media. Now, that's something that's really difficult to do for all of us, because for some reason, when we watch TV, it gives us a feel, or news, or however you are getting it, it gives us a feeling of control, and the situation is one of lack of control. And we like to feel like we're in control, but it's really an illusion. The news isn't really control, and we know that it's not very good for us. We know that the more we watch, the more likely that we will be affected by it. And there's some really good studies that show that watching traumatic events again and again and again can actually be traumatizing. So try to minimize your exposure and use reliable sources. And I can say for myself that the first few days after the horrific events of Simchat Torah, I was glued just like everybody else. But since that time, I'm much more measured. I listen to the news when I get up in the morning. I listen a few times during the day. I have one feed that gives me news, a news summary 3 times a day, and that's about it. And that leads me to the third thing. I'm busy. Stay busy. Keep busy. Find things to do. Busy is distracting, and that's good. There's not a whole lot we can do about the situation. We are not in control, but we are in control of ourselves. And keeping busy, particularly with meaningful work, if you can find meaningful work, volunteering, doing things that you feel are important, perhaps for your children in Israel or for the state of Israel, or some other kind of meaningful work, if it be visiting old people or sick people, whatever it is, keeping busy is a very good way to deal with this very high pressure situation. And the final thing I would say about taking care of yourself is to take care, is actually to take care of yourself. Spend the time doing physical exercise, eating healthfully, trying to get enough sleep. I know that sleep can be very rocky, but take care of yourself and do it with self-compassion. This isn't a good time to be so self-critical. We have to go easy on ourselves, pat ourselves on the back, build ourselves up rather than cut ourselves down. It's really a difficult time, and we need to practice that muscle of self-compassion. Think about, one good way to think about self-compassion is to think about, what would you tell a friend of yours who was feeling like you're feeling right now? You'd probably be very nice and very understanding. So try to be very nice and very understanding to yourself. And now for some very clear, straightforward thoughts about how to help your soldier. I'm sure if you are a parent of a soldier in Israel, you're experiencing a lot of emotions, and a lot of them are not what we would call positive emotions. We're worried, we're anxious, we may really be losing a lot of sleep, have a lot of fear. It's really hard. On the other hand, we are very proud of them. And I think that we have to, when they call, we have to be able to put our worries and our anxieties aside and not share those with our soldiers, but share with them how proud we are of them, how we are confident in them and confident in the IDF, how we support them. Those are the kinds of things they need to hear from us. They're really, excuse me, they don't have to be very long conversations either. It's, I love you, I'm proud of you, you're doing something so important. And not go into how you're feeling and how you are worried, because you don't want them to have that on their head as well. Of course, it's important to be able to express those feelings, but not to your soldier child. You really are in a unique position. You are the child's child. It's a grown-up child, but he is still your child, or she is still your child. And you are in a very unique position. Parents have tremendous amount of power here. And by being supportive, you're giving them a very strong backbone. So I think that is really your primary goal when you're interacting with your children. You can ask them what the food is like. Don't ask them where they are. They probably won't tell you. If they want to tell you, they will. Don't ask too many questions, because they probably will get annoyed, and they're not really supposed to be talking about what they're doing. So, you can say, share whatever you can. I'm interested, but I don't want to ask. And again, remember to tell them how much you love them, how proud you are of them, how you have their back, and how you are really doing fine. I think the fact that they hear that you are okay and doing fine is really, really supportive for them. So that is what I have to say for right now. And I'm happy to answer questions further along down the road. Hopefully I will stop coughing by then. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naomi Bam. Naomi, we know that you've been doing a lot of talking on many webinars, giving advice to people in Israel and across the world. You mentioned how different people express their emotions in different ways, which is a normal reaction to a traumatic event. You spoke about, as a parent, keep yourself together when speaking to your son or daughter. They are in a high tense situation. It would not be helpful for you to express, even though you have fear and anxiety and stress, it would not be helpful to express that to them. Talk about how you love them, how you support them, how proud you are of them. Don't ask them questions that they may not be able to answer you. In a brief conversation, talk about what's going on. Let them know what's going on with your other family members at home, and that you're looking forward to their being safe. And um, don't ask the question that a mother normally does. Do you have enough food? Are you warm? Those are very nice questions to ask, but this may not be the time to ask those kind of questions that are very important. Talk about how you're supporting them. Thank you very much. Tani Reese. Tani, you are a former lone soldier in the Combat Engineering Corps. Tell us about your experiences as a lone soldier that might be helpful to parents, siblings, other people listening to this conversation. Tani, thanks so much for joining us from Canada.
Thanks so much for having me. I do have to apologize in advance for any noise you might be hearing. I'm currently at the high school I work at, so adults or teenage boys are going to be teenage boys regardless of whatever's going on around them. And I'm hoping not too much of what I'm going to say is going to be a repeat from Dr. Baum, but some of it very well might be. I think the most interesting part for me over the past few weeks has been the fact that, I served back 15 years ago in 2009 as a combat engineer in Handelsakravit. So I was a lone soldier for in the Hesder program, Machal Hesder program. So I've seen it from the inside. I've certainly been in their shoes as lone soldiers specifically. And thinking on that experience along with the past few weeks where I've had the scoot of supporting a lot of our alumni who are currently in now, and a lot of my family, a lot of the people who entered the Army with me who are still doing it to this day. It's been a very interesting juxtaposition between the two. I think from my perspective, being a soldier is difficult. I think that's an obvious statement, but a very true one, in the sense that soldiers, by definition, have to encounter and deal with things that no one else in the world can or has to. We encounter things that we never dreamed we ever would have to, including people who draft and suddenly find themselves in situations they never could have imagined. When I was in the Army, I was a minesweeper. My job was basically to respond to civilian and military calls of distress when people are trapped in minefields and go in and extract them. By definition, you're walking into what is usually a medical emergency and a crisis that you're basically seeing people on some of their worst days. And you never know what to expect, and you're certainly never really trained for everything you're going to see. And that's difficult. That's difficult even as a soldier, let alone in Israel, where every single thing you're doing is around the people that you care about deeply, and your family is within kilometers of where you're serving. And even more so as a lone soldier when things get thrown off. And I think that's really where I start to compare them. There's some really positive parts of being a lone soldier and some really negative parts of being a soldier. Lone soldiers or regular soldiers in the Israeli army, they serve their time, they see all these things and it's difficult, and then they go home for the weekend and they walk in their door, and for the most part, even on the basic level of meals and laundry and all the basic necessities of your life, you walk in and you hand your laundry to your mother or your sibling, and you sit down at the table you grew up at, and you go and take a nap in the bed that you grew up in. And there's something incredibly healing to that experience, to go back to the things that you are so familiar with, to a safe place where you can then process a lot of the things you've seen that week, the people that you know who are your support system who are there. Being a lone soldier oftentimes means you're going back to an apartment where there's no one there except for you or maybe another soldier, where you're loved ones, their support systems are on a different time frame, and a different time zone. It's harder to get in touch, and certainly the surroundings, though we build them for ourselves, are not always the support systems we're used to, and therefore we have to rebuild those things for ourselves. And it can be difficult when we talk about trauma, when we talk about resilience building. Our routines, the people who we surround ourselves with, who we grew up with, our support systems, they are incredibly helpful in defining what is going to turn into something that is going to be more difficult for us down the line and make it harder for us to understand, versus the moments when we get to process and contextualize the things that we've seen and kind of learn how to cope better with them. So it's a very difficult part of it, because a lot of lone soldiers struggle with that. There are a lot of supports in the army, and certainly they bring in a lot of specialists to this regard. We were discussing before, there's a plethora of mental health workers in Israel, to some, that are available for many of these people. Back in my day, there were far less, but it's growing over time. But it is incredibly difficult. And when I talk to a lot of our alumni, even now, one of the first things they say is, I get off, or I have a few moments. All I want to do is call my parents. All I want to do is like speak to the people I know, just kind of vent, not tell them everything that's going on, just have a conversation that's familiar to me, have a connection that's familiar to me, give myself that space and feeling of safety that kind of lets me start to figure this thing out. That can be the negative sides. It's a lot of the negative sides. To the point where, I know I struggled with it when I was in, and I certainly, I got a strange apology from my commander at the end of, afterwards, when I saw him at a wedding. He said, I just saw this whole documentary about being a lone soldier. I didn't realize how difficult it was for you guys. I'm so sorry. It's like, it's fine. No worries. I had a good time with it. But, it's not an easy existence. I think the other thing that can be positive, and it's a relative positivity, is being a soldier means, by definition, you are standing up every day to protect the people you care about, to protect the country you care about, to put yourself in between those people and the harm that's coming for them. It's very apparent in Israel, probably more than in some other places. However, there's something to be said, however horrible as it might seem in the moment, for when those you are really, really close to and come to your mind first are far away enough that you're not immediately burdened with the worry about their safety. Obviously, you have friends and family and people who in Israel who you're still worried about, but all the more people are safe. We've all, anybody who's been through the rocket attacks in Israel knows you check in with everybody and you see where everyone is, and you're checking people off a list, literally. One more person to know that they're safe and away, and somebody you don't have to worry about as much, is a load off, that you can focus on other things. You can focus on the things you need to do to get through the day. And that is something, there's something to be said for that, to knowing that the things you're experiencing, that the horrors that you have to see, won't necessarily be something that everyone, or that the people you care about, are going to necessarily have to endure. Obviously, when we're over here, which is what we're seeing on this side, it's not that simple. Obviously, we want to take care of our people. Obviously, we're struggling quite gravely with our both guilt about not being over them more and being with them, but also the connection we have to those people and our worry. That is part and parcel with the existence of being part of the lives of anybody in the army, but it's still very difficult. And I think that a lot of times I'm struggling with the words here. A lot of times that when we have people in that position, we tend to look for opportunities, or look for ways in which to alleviate that guilt in some way. It can be, we've all been doing it, and rightfully so, for the past few weeks, investing our time and effort into causes that have meaning, to purpose that gives us something to do and something to feel like we are a part of that thing. I'm going to mirror Dr. Bauman, saying that just be careful with that a little bit, because while we want to feel a part of what they're going through, we want to be connected, there's also something to be said for not being too connected. We don't have to we don't have to force ourselves to feel more suffering in order to connect to the suffering of others. We can, in fact, be that support system for them to come back to and say, there's no, you can take a step away from it for a bit, and we are okay. We are safe. We are taking care of ourselves, and you guys, we are the island in that sea that you can come back to and get something familiar. And I think that is, if I had any takeaway from this, I think that is one of the most important things, to make sure that that we are embodying that sense of, you don't need to worry about me right now. My anxieties are my anxieties. I own those things. I'm willing to talk, but not right now, right? This is a safe place. This is your home, really, because you're not necessarily going home to your apartment, or you're not going home to your home right now. You're away, but in this phone call, in this moment of connection, that this is an opportunity for you to feel that and start that safe space and healing process, which I think has been very helpful to a lot of our soldiers of the last little bit. It's doable, but it is much harder. Just remembering that for all of this stuff, we talk a lot about resilience building, and a lot about the ways in which we protect ourselves from things going further. Routines and the things that we're familiar with are very protective. We can provide that. Purpose, which our soldiers have in multitudes, is also very important, but that's also important for us. Knowing that we have a purpose, but that purpose can also be just being there for the people we care about, being there for our communities, being there for the people around us, who need us, and being there to support our soldiers where they need us most, right? And with it comes the caveat of every mental health worker and therapist, which is, be aware of where it's too much for you. Be aware of what you're capable of and what you can't handle. And that it's okay to say, listen, I want to hear what's going on with you. I want to hear what you're seeing. I want to hear what you're enduring. If that's something you want to do, you get to choose how you do that. We all mourn differently. We all struggle with our own unique things, and we all need different things out of the situation. But to say, listen, honestly, right now where I'm at, I want to be there for you, but I can't be that person because it's not going to, I can't handle it, right? Having a negative reaction is arguably sometimes worse than just saying, you know what, I need the boundary up right now here. And support is support, but knowing where our limits are. Yeah, that's my best advice for these times. It's my best take. And certainly I can leave off with the fact that, it's always a tough existence. We lone soldiers have their secondary families around them, their brothers in arms, their people, their commanders, everybody that's there. They know that they have support. They feel that support. So just allow yourself to be a part of that, and be as present as you can, and take care of yourself so that they don't have to worry about you as much, right? As best you can. And then you guys can work it out together later, if that makes any sense. Anyway, thank you again, and I'm sure I'll be around for questions after.
Connie, thank you very much. I begin with you were a minesweeper in Lebanon, and I don't think anybody who has not served, regardless of what you think you know, or what you read, or what you see, can really understand what it means to be in combat, or what it means to be a minesweeper, or what it means to see active war. You think you have a bad day, go be a minesweeper in the middle of a war. It's a whole different conversation. So thank you very much. You spoke about how a soldier, and we all have, as I started by saying, millions of relatives, and everyone knows someone. It's time to use a new expression, 0 degrees of separation of people in Chutz La'aretz to people in Eretz Israel. You spoke about how lone soldiers don't have a home to go to sleep in that bed, familiar bed, or do the laundry and have a meal prepared for them. So if somebody wants to be helpful to a lone soldier, and you see someone who has a day off or a weekend off, why don't you say to them, if you know they're a lone soldier, can I cook you a meal? Can I drop off a meal? Can I do your laundry? Don't ask the question, how are you doing? How are things? Just say something in a very practical way. Secondly, I have a good friend who his son was a lone soldier. He came back a half a year ago. And of course, lone soldiers are not called back to the reserves. And he was a sniper, as Mayor Rosenfeld is going to speak about his son, who was a sniper. He was a sniper stationed in Gaza for a significant amount of time. And we're close, and we sit together, and his son joins us for meals. And I just know that people just want to ask him the question. They just want to ask him the question. What was it like to be a sniper? What happened? And they just want there's a underbelly in a person that's called Schadenfreude that people have, that they sort of ask questions about a dark place. You said we don't have to feel everything that a lone soldier feels. Don't ask questions of a lone soldier that you shouldn't be asking. There are ground rules, questions that shouldn't be asked. I'm a child of survivor. Norman is a child of survivors. Our parents went through Auschwitz. We grew up understanding that there are certain questions that you simply don't ask. Don't ask questions of a lone soldier that you shouldn't be asking. Thank you, Tani. Rabbi Mary Rosenfeld, an attorney, executive director of Yeshiva Shalavim. Your son was an active sniper in the IDF. You're a parent of a lone soldier. Please share your thoughts for our audience.
Oh, thank you. First of all, in an act of utter coincidence, my son actually predated Tani in the same platoon by just a couple of years. So shout out to Sheshefes Shalosh from those who serve. But I asked Bracha before when they asked me to join this panel, and I said, certainly you'd want somebody whose kids are currently serving, not somebody who's had a son that went through the system. And her reply, I thought, was incredibly profound. She said, people want to see that there's another side, that you can come out of this experience as a parent, as a better parent, as a more understanding parent, and that your child who has served comes out differently also. Very briefly, my son was a very typical five towns kid, hockey team, the kind of kid who probably, instead of recharging his iPad, would just throw it out and say, I need a new one. And I will tell you, just to jump ahead, that one of the really important things that my wife says probably the best part of being in the Army is the discipline that kids go through. He went from being kind of like the kid who didn't clean up his room to putting his pencils in a row with his name neatly etched in each one, and his socks all in a row. And it just did a lot for him personally as a human being. It matured him in a very profound way. I can tell you honestly, we raised our child and all our children in a very Zionistic home. And so we were not surprised when he came to us after his first year in yeshiva and said, I need to do more and I want to join. And at that time, it was for a 9-month stint. And we said, okay, what could happen? He went to Handasat Kravit. The first Shabbos that he was there, he realized that most of his pluga had never spent a Shabbos or didn't know what it was. They were Russians, they were new immigrants. So he and his friends organized an Oneg Shabbos for their soldiers and spoke to them about what Shabbos is like. And he said, you know what, Dad? If I came to the Army for this, it was worth it. And that of course filled us with tremendous pride. Just to make a long story short, he kept re-upping because he had a choice of being a minesweeper or a sharpshooter, and he opted for the sharpshooter route, which made me feel a lot more comfortable. But as he got better and better at it, they sent him to sniper school. So that filled us with a lot more pride, but it came with a commitment for another 9 months or another year. And we said that's fine. Never really worried about him. Spoke to him 3 times a week, 4 times a week. At one point, he had been stationed up north, and he had been playing in the snow for I don't know how many years, how many hours. It seems like years, and got probably pneumonia. He was sent to a hospital in Tzfat, and he, as Tani mentioned, did have a host family. They lived in Kidumim, and my wife was ready to get on a plane and go visit him in this hospital. And she said in Hebrew, "Don't worry, your son is my son. The same way that you would get on a plane now, I would also. But the same way that you would take care of him, I'm taking care of him." There was a real understanding that we are all in this together. And it was echoed. Thank God he came out of the hospital, and his family helped him helped him recuperate. But Josh would tell me that he was constantly asked by other members of his team, "Why are you doing this? We have to do this, but why are you doing this?" And his answer is I have to do this also. This is who I am. This is our home, whether I live here or not. And I have a real sense of mission. So I just want to share one anecdote, and I've been speaking a lot lately about my son's service. My father, as Dr. Mendel mentioned, and as Dr. Blumenthal knows, was a survivor of Auschwitz, and my mom was also a survivor. They came to visit my son on one of their many trips to Israel, and because he was a lone soldier at that time, he had the ability to go and visit them. The unfortunate part was he was in the middle of an Emda on a watch, sort of somewhere up on the Syrian border, where with the face paint on, the camouflage, wearing a I forgot what they call it, these one-piece insulated outfits, and he had been there for 17 hours, and he kept asking through his radio his commander if he could go visit his grandparents. The commander kept joking around with him. He said, "Yeah, 1 or 2 more terrorists, and you can go." Finally, he let him go, but he didn't have time to change, and so Josh shows up at the Inbal Hotel with face paint, with this enormous sniper rifle. And my parents embraced him, obviously. And my father said, "Josh, I want to tell you something. When I was 15 years old and I was in Auschwitz, and I saw lines of people being herded into the gas chambers, I cried out to Hashem to send us a malach, to send us some guardian who could save us from all this." He said, I was zoche, I earned the right to see that my grandson is one of those malachim, is one of those angels who guard over us. And it had a very, very profound impact, because as was said before, as Dr. Baum said, and as Tani said, there is a sense of purpose that you are doing something more. And certainly those of us sitting at home now and who have given their kids over to do this incredible avodas hakodesh, this holy, holy work, we can take part justly in the pride and knowing that they are doing something that is just so potent with purpose, and doing their bit for Klal Yisrael. I remember the first time Josh told me that he did what snipers do, and I said, "Well, how do you feel?" He says, "I feel like I saved lives in Jewish lives." He said, I did what I was supposed to do. I davened at 7 o'clock at night. He put on his tefillin, filed his report, and went to sleep with a very clear conscience. There's a sense of mission, and that sense of mission carries over way past your service. Josh is now a Rav Beit Sefer and a principal or one associate principal at a large day school here in the Northeast. And although he's not in active service anymore and he's aged out because he hasn't kept up his sniper ranking, he still feels like he's doing what he can for the war effort and for Klal Yisrael by talking about it to the kids, by making it real, by bringing a human dimension to stories that they hear. And I think that all of us who have kids in the Army, had kids in the Army, there is a certain sense of pride and of purpose. And I will tell you that there is another side. It is, until this war started, it was really in the rearview mirror for my son. He has 4 kids of his own, Kananara. He has other things to worry about. This has brought back to the forefront a sense of purpose in his life. And all I can tell you is that for anybody whose child is serving or is helping out in any way in Israel, and for those of us who are helping out in any way that we can, the sense of purpose survives the actual service. And I think that that is, like it or not, the legacy of having a Chayal Boded, a lone soldier in the family.
Well, Mayor, thank you very much. I'm struck by so many things that you said, and I just want to comment your last words that you just finished with. Your sense of purpose survives your experience. I know it's difficult for a parent to, while their son or daughter are currently a lone soldier serving in combat or serving anywhere, hopefully they can get some comfort understanding that the sense of purpose survives the experience. The other thing that you spoke about is that, when your son was laying in the snow up north for hours, and you wound up in the hospital with pneumonia, the natural reaction from your wife was, I'm going to Israel, I'm going to take care of my son. And it's part of the experience. And you kind of absorb that situation, understanding, and your son re-upped for several times.
Yeah.
We have many questions that people have asked us. Dr. Norman Blumenthal, please share your thoughts. Ohel Zach, the family, director of the National Trauma Center. Dr. Blumenthal, some of your thoughts, and then we'll go to some of the questions that we have.
Okay, well, humility is not one of my strengths. I am very humbled. Humbled to be in the presence of all of you. All of you are people I know and have worked with over the varying years, but my undying respect for everything you're doing, you have done, and for your children, as I didn't think it could be any greater, and it is great. I'm going to share some very quick thoughts because I have no business being here. My speaking actually reminds me, David mentioned that I'm a child of a survivor. Reminds me of when I worked up the courage to tell my mother, Alaa Shalom, that I was doing my dissertation on children of Holocaust survivors. And I remember it like yesterday. And she had a very shocked response. One of it was, I know I'm damaged. I don't want to think that you are. How she could overlook that, I don't know. But the other question, her other response was a story she told me. My mother was liberated in 1944 in Bergen-Belsen, April 18th, 1944 in Bergen-Belsen. 45 in Bergen-Belsen by the British. My mother speaks 7 languages and English was one of them. So the British used her as an interpreter. And because she had that sort of exalted status, one day one of the commanders came to her and said that during the liberation of the camp, they had someone with whatever was a movie camera at that time, filming it and filming the first impressions of liberating the survivors. And they were having their first showing of this movie. And they invited her to come into the tent with mostly commanders and from the British Army and view the view the film. It wasn't a video. And of course, it's 1945. So it's in black and white. There's no sound. There's cracks in the film. And she's watching this film without any of the sounds, the smells. And she said she was sitting there crying and saying, no one will ever know. No one will ever know. And I'm sitting here crying and saying to all of you, I don't know. I really don't know. A few thoughts do come to my mind, and I hope they're helpful. One was actually a very beautiful story I once heard from a patient of mine. It's a woman who told me that when she had her first child was born, the nurses, of course, brought her the baby, and she held the baby, and she started to cry. Everybody thought she was just very moved by having given birth to her first child, but that's not what she was crying about. What she was crying about was she was thinking about everything this child's going to go through in her life, and she's not going to know about it. And I think that's one of the nisyonot, one of the challenges of being a parent, that you love your child dearly, and you want to be there for every moment of their life and to protect them. And there are going to be so many experiences that they go through that you're not even going to know about. And I think that very much captures for all of you, or all of you heroic parents of lone soldiers, that there's going to be much going on in your child's life that you're not going to know about. I think everybody, and I would say particularly Tani, spoke about very dramatically of not coming back to your parents' apartment and how pernicious and how challenging loneliness can be. And again, it behooves all of us to see to it that the soldiers who cannot just go to their family in Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim have realized the added challenge and what we can do to mitigate and lower that loneliness. And everybody spoke about not sharing your fears. It's very interesting if you think about it. How's a soldier trained? It's a very regimented training. You march, you salute, you stand at attention. Why? Why can't you say, here's a gun, shoot it, go, And I think the psychology behind this kind of regimented training is that these heroic men and women are being told to do something that makes no sense. You're being told to touch mines, They're being told to lie in snow 17 hours. They're being told to run into a volley of fire and fire back. And they need that kind of discipline. They need that kind of capacity to put their fears aside, to not think about their fears, not think about other people. In a way, almost, it just that what's called compartmentalization, to really do that. Otherwise, they couldn't function as soldiers, and that's something that those of us who are talking to the soldiers have to respect, which is that they can't think about your fears. They can't think about their own fears. If they're going to be effective soldiers, that has to be portioned out. And that's why we have to, as everyone said so eloquently, tell them how proud we are of them, tell them how much we love them, tell them how important what they're doing, reinforce that. And that's a very important part of communicating. I think I'll mention one more point, and then I really think people have questions. We have limited time. A lot of people have spoken. I think Mayor alluded to it a bit, but when you're in war, and this we know from our trauma work, you'll sometimes see some awful things. You see some very frightening experiences, and you also see terrible loss and terrible pain and loss of buddies, and you see some pretty awful things, which again, you can't take it all in, Because if you take it all in while it's happening, you won't be able to function. I mean, I know it's nowhere nearly as heroic, but I know the person, the trauma team, when we have to go and do a trauma intervention, while we're doing it, we can't fully internalize the enormity of what we're doing because we wouldn't be able to do it. We would be dysfunctional. But what happens psychologically when you're exposed to something that impactful and can't allow it into your conscious mind, it gets filed and it gets put in the back burners, doesn't disappear. And when it's all over, that's when it comes back. And I think when we think of the lone soldiers, when we think of all of our soldiers, we have to anticipate that there will be much that they have probably witnessed already, and I hope not, but may witness in the future that won't register with them, but will come back to haunt them later on. And again, those of us who have the luxury of having been spared that kind of challenge need to do everything we can, even if it's supporting programs that allow the soldiers to recover and recuperate from this trauma. That's part of our participation and might be our anticipation. And again, as the outsider, I will say for myself, and I think I speak for anybody else who's not a lone soldier or a parent of a lone soldier, that all of us will daven harder from now on for your sons and for your friends. And the Mishaberach Latzahal, the Amen we say afterwards, will be said with a lot more intensity and meaning. And I thank you all for everything you're doing and for presenting today.
Norman Blumenthal, thank you very much. We recognize for the parents of lone soldiers, although Israel has been at some level of war in its entire more than 75-year existence, that this is a different circumstance of calling up 330,000 soldiers in service and having tens of thousands of soldiers, including lone soldiers, stationed on the southern border and stationed on the northern border, recognizing that this is a very different type of circumstance, having a lone soldier in such an active war. We don't have the words to properly express our support, which we do, and our heartfelt prayers, feelers for every single person. Tani, we have a number of questions. I want to get to several as quickly as possible. If you can give us a focused answer to a parent with a lone soldier who has several younger siblings at home, how can a parent explain that to them in a way that they could absorb that information, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, and so on?
Yeah, the first thing to remember, I think, when it comes to speaking to especially younger kids, very young, much younger kids, is the fact that while we talk about a lot of things, a lot of that stuff is not necessarily developmentally accessible to them yet. We need to really be careful about what language we're using and kind of how we frame it. That being said, the other thing I feel like I've been saying a lot these past couple of weeks is that we oftentimes want to protect our kids from a lot of the information that's out there and to not let them access or not tell them about things, because that way they can maintain that innocence for a bit longer. They can not have to worry as much. The mistake we often make is assuming that by not having a conversation with them, they're not having that conversation anyway, which we know they are, especially with the way social media is today and the way mobile devices are. Even younger kids and are getting access to that information. By not having a conversation, all we're really doing is taking our own voice out of that conversation and not getting the opportunity to give them a framing that I think is important for them to be able to contextualize and understand what's going on. I'm actually going to pull from what Dr. Baum said earlier, which is when we're talking to younger kids, especially younger kids, I think it's really important to remember to focus on positives and a lot of our pride and a lot of our connection, our empathy for what's going on. Speaking to them, letting them know what's happening. We don't have to go into gruesome detail. We don't have to go into a lot of the negative and horrific things we're all being inundated with, but to focus on, your sibling is in the army. I'm sure we've had this conversation before, but this is what that means. They're protecting. They are standing guard. They are helping as best they can. We are proud of what they're doing, and we miss them, but we love them. The positive reframe that I think can really help them access and contextualize the fact that this person's part of their life is in a different place. They're seeing a lot of worry, which we can't necessarily hide, but allows us them to understand the emotional state that we are in, to a degree where we appear to be, we are attempting to convey at least the fact that we are in control of those emotions, that we can handle this, that we can handle what's going on, and that by proxy, they can handle it as well. I want to be as succinct as possible, but this question particularly reminds me when I was in the army. I went to visit a cousin of mine, and my cousin had a son who was probably about 4 years old at the time. And I remember because I used to go there quite often for Shabbat and to spend time with them. And he came up to me one day and he said, "Here, I drew a picture of you." I hadn't really spoken to him anything about what thing I was doing. All he knew was I was a chayal. I show up with a gun occasionally, and I stay for Shabbos, and I talk and I have fun. And he drew a picture, and he said, "Here's you, here's me, here's my Abba, and here's the mechabel you just took out." And all the adults standing around just kind of looked at him and said, "What? Where did he even get this idea? Like, how does he even know that that's happening?" He's 4 or 5, like literally the youngest kid, but they know. They're having that conversation whether we like it or not. So we need to be aware of those things, and I think it's important to acknowledge that they're getting information from places, but that we can reframe in a positive way and convey how we are proud of and supporting their siblings and why it's important what they're doing. And I think that it tends to go over far better.
Connie, thank you very much. Dr. Blumenthal, I've heard Dr. Norman Blumenthal say so many times that you think your 7-year-old doesn't know what's going on. You think your 5-year-old doesn't. They know what's going on. So you're better off explaining it to them in a way that they understand. Otherwise, they will find out from somebody else. A couple of other quick questions. Some folks have asked, some parents have asked, should I go to Israel? Can I be closer to my son? Some people have asked me that question. This is the way how I've advised them. Absolutely, if you have the means and you have the capability and you can get on an El Al flight because no one else is flying these days, and you can go there for 2 days, 3 days, however long, recognize that it depends whether your son or your daughter are where they're stationed. If they are in some place that they can come and visit you in your hotel or by a friend, in your apartment, whatever it may be, wonderful. And if they're not, if they're down south or up north, they may not even have their cell phone with them. We know that they have already given their phones in. So if you have the capability to do that, you can even take some warm clothing with you. You can even take some of their favorite foods. If they can't visit you, leave it at the hotel desk with their name on it. Leave it by a friend. When they can, they'll come pick it up. By all means, if that's something that you can do, why not? Naomi, you spoke about earlier, Dr. Baum, about that you look at one news feed. You do not look at things continually. So this is a 2-part question, Dr. Baum. Part number 1 is, I cannot help myself. My son is there, my daughter is there. How do I keep myself from being obsessed by looking at the media? And the second part of that is, if I happen to be Shomer Shabbat, and that's 25 hours that I really can't look, how can I function? So an immediate answer would be, you're lucky. You can't look at it for 25 hours. Naomi, I'm obsessed. I have to look at it. How do you advise a parent?
So I heard that question just the other night. And the woman who asked it said that she has all the apps on her phone, Telegram, all the news stations and the radio stations, and she has a friend who told her that she took them all off her phone because she couldn't stand it anymore, but she can't do that. So I said, well, maybe what she could do is do it slowly, take off one or two at a time. So that would be one suggestion. Another suggestion is to really try to keep yourself busy, because if you are busy, then you really just don't have time to I mean, you still might be checking in once an hour every once in a while, but if you're truly busy, you just don't have time to look at the news that much. So that's what I would say. Try to take your energies and channel them somewhere, where you get some meaningful, feedback. And let yourself watch a couple times a day. Try to restrict it, but say, okay, I'm gonna listen at 7 in the morning, 12 at noon, and 7 at night. And I know that if something happens, my husband will call me or my friend will call me. I will ask them to kind of clue me in. Your question about Shabbat. So I can really relate to that. This past Shabbat, it was very hard not to listen to the news. And of course, what I did is I went down, I live right at the entrance to Efrat, and there's a shomer right at the entrance, and they know what's going on, the shomrim. So I went down and checked with the shomer a couple times to get an update. And every time he said to me, there's nothing much going on, I'd say, oh, no, come on, tell me. And he'd say, no, really, there's really just nothing going on. So, you talk to if you absolutely need to find out what's going on, go over to your neighbor, knock on the door and say, have you heard any news? But like you say, David, use it as a good break. But towards the end of Shabbat, I could feel the tension mounting. Like, uh-oh, what are we going to find out now? Yeah. So, I think we all feel that to a certain degree. And that reminds us, how much we're, hooked into the news. But again, I think it pays to consider how much we're really getting from it. What are we really getting from it? They go over the same thing again. How valuable is that?
Thank you very much, Naomi. Mayo, you spoke about this earlier. Actually, everybody did. To the question, as a parent, if my son happens to have an opportunity to give me a call, and I know he is someplace in harm's way, all of Israel is in harm's way, what can I, as a parent, give us those few words, those few phrases that I, as a parent, should say to him in those few minutes that I can speak with him?
I think Dr. Baum touched on that in a technical and very practical way. I will tell you that, first of all, if they're calling and they've been in battle, it means they're already someplace past the real heavy part of where you wouldn't know what to say to them. When my son called me, and after he didn't have his phone for a while, and I knew that he was in the midst of action, I would just say, thank God. What I did say is, thank God you're okay. I'm not sure that was the right thing to do, but that was just the emotion that came out. And it's the same way that if your child came back from a dangerous situation, you would just give them a hug. You just try to give them a virtual hug. I would just say that I guess there's no right or wrong thing to say. Lemrot everything that Dr. Baum said, and it would be great if you had a script in front of you, but you're really at a very emotional and vulnerable moment when you get to speak to your child in the midst of really an existential crisis in the literal sense of the word. And I think that for better or for worse, whatever you say is not going to really affect their lives so much that you can't afford to make the mistake. You say what you feel. I doubt that my son at this point would recall any of the conversations that we had while he was serving. Just try to be sensitive to where they are. And I think Dr. Baum gave some very helpful outlines. But as I say, it's like, you're a parent. You're allowed to say stuff that doesn't necessarily comport 100% with what the textbooks say you're supposed to say.
Hey, Tani, is there anything that stands out? One thing that you remember that somebody said to you, your parents said to you when you were a lone soldier, that just screams that at you? That was, wow.
It's been a while, first of all, but I mean, I don't think there were singular words that particularly meant a lot to me. What I think I always appreciated was that every relationship is different. Every relationship has its unique give and take, and a lot of times, what made I think me feel calmer and better and kind of connected in that moment was the things that people would say that were very much like characteristic of our relationship. For some people, it's a joke. For some people, it's a serious comment or a question about how I'm doing. It really depends on the person, right? And I think that oftentimes we wonder if there's this magic word that we can or should say in the moment, when in reality, oftentimes we know what will work best because we have that relationship standing. And I think falling back on what is comfortable, what feels right, what we how we know the person that we're connecting with, especially our child, leaning back on that relationship is what's going to be, I think, most comforting in that moment. And that in of itself gives them that opportunity to release some of that tension. I think that's the best answer I can give.
I just want to add, so, I'm the only one in this group currently who's talking to soldiers. And truthfully, what I'm telling all of them is, you're great, you're wonderful, I love you, I'm so proud of you. Really, that's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But there was a question that came through that I think is an important question, like what happens if your kid expresses a difficulty, whether it be fear or anxiety or cold or this or that? What do you do? I mean, like, your heart goes out to them. Do you want to like feed into it and say, oh yeah, it really is scary, or yeah, I really understand you? Or is this the moment to say, listen, you're with a lot of good people and you have a lot of support there and everybody's in it together and you have wonderful commanders and you're going to be okay. And truthfully, I don't think when somebody's in the army, this is certainly not a time for psychological this is not a time for therapy. This is really not the time. You want to like help them put themselves back together and get out there. And it's just sort of like you do this with little kids sometimes, who express something, they're afraid, they're this, they're that. You can say, yeah, I understand, and now it's time, and now you need to. And really, I think that's our role. I don't think it's our role to start examining and pulling it apart and looking at it, when in fact it's so different what we might have done with them had they been with us at home around the kitchen table. This is a totally different circumstance. And we are so far, even here in Israel, we're far from the front, far. My son, maybe he's an hour away from here, but he's light years away from here.
Now I want to finish with one additional question that in and of itself requires a lengthy conversation. And that's after they come back, after the soldiers come back. A number of years ago, I spoke with a captain in the American Army who had just come back from 3 tours, Iraq, Afghanistan. He served 9 years, mostly in the theater of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were speaking about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And he said to me, David, it's PTS. We in the Army refer to it as PTS, post-traumatic stress. So many experience it, we don't consider it a disorder. It has become all too common. So please don't use the word D with us. That was a very strong comment that has stayed with me for a long time. Of course, PTSD is a clinical diagnosis. Regardless, we're not talking about the diagnosis. For the soldiers, I'm speaking in general, but now for lone soldiers, asking you about them and about their parents, I'm asking a complex question for you to answer in 1 minute. Services are available to them. How should they access services? How do they know that they need some professional help from you and others after they come back? Dr. Bell.
So I understand that somebody who's been 9 years in Afghanistan might say we're all post-traumatic, and that may be in fact true. I don't think that all soldiers have PTSD. I think, most people have ways to heal and heal normally and naturally. That doesn't mean that a significant amount don't need help or want to reach out for help. We can't push them. All we can do is offer. We can say that there are services available, try to destigmatize the services. And I think, that's really happened. That certainly has happened in Israeli society, where people are much more willing to get services. Somebody mentioned on the question and answers about this group called Peace of Mind, which I was instrumental in helping to start. There are many groups like this where they take groups of soldiers to process their Army service in a group setting with mental health professionals. And that would be sort of a service provided to everybody across the board, whether they actively feel like they're post-traumatic or not, whether they're having symptoms or not. Everybody had difficult experiences in the Army, and it wouldn't hurt to have an opportunity to share with the other people that you were with in your tzevet, in your group, or in your pluga. But to say that everybody's going to need to go get help would be, I think that's a mistake. I think it's like, I was interviewed by somebody on the radio a couple days ago, and he said, and now we're going to be talking about this important issue, mental health. We're all going to be post-traumatic, and we're all going to be on the couches of psychologists, all of us. And then he asked me a question, and I said, no, wait, let's take 10 steps back. We're not all going to be post-traumatic. We're not all going to need to go to psychologists. So I think we have to, there are people who will be, and we have to help them, and we have to teach them what the symptoms are. When is it time to go get help? But there are a lot of people who are in between, who had difficult experiences, who are functioning very well, who aren't really interested in therapy, and that's okay. That's really okay. We tend to, I think, over psychologize, and it's good to have services, and it's good to destigmatize the services, but I don't think everybody's going to need to be on the couch.
God forbid that I should have come across in any way suggesting that everyone experiences post-traumatic stress disorder. If I didn't, I meant to say that he said we all experience stress in combat, and that's absolutely true. That does not mean that's what he was saying. We all experience.
That's okay. Okay, so I would definitely agree with that. I thought he was saying that everybody has PTSD. We're just not going to call it that because it doesn't sound so good. I'm sorry. It's late at night. I misunderstood you. But I would agree with him. Everybody experiences high levels of stress in combat. And with some of them, it does turn into PTSD. I think these groups where they take everybody and help them process is wonderful, because it's really bringing mental health. This is really what I love, bringing mental health to communities and large populations without, turning into something's wrong with you. It's really, you've experienced something, it's been difficult. Let's have an opportunity to look at it and unpack it a bit and
as a
give you some
parent,
tools for resilient living. Yeah.
and as a parent, when your child returns and is sitting at the dining room table, don't become the psychologist to evaluate them, to see how they're doing, how they're feeling. Are you okay? Do you need some help? Get back to some sense of normalcy, which they want to get back to.
Give
Dr.
it
Neil, Mayor Rosenfeld, Tani Reese, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. To all who joined us that have lone soldiers in the Army, they're not alone. Lone, but not alone. And this conversation will follow up. It's been audio taped, videotaped for anyone that would like to look at it. We'll put it out in the next day or two. We're also going to be asking everyone in a couple of minutes to complete an evaluation form that will help us also schedule some additional webinars. Everyone, especially Dr. Baum, where it's midnight right now, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone, be safe.